Hello, hello, hello. All right. Hello, hello, hello. I feel like this is off. There we go. Somewhere in the middle. Yeah, it's right here. It's like right here. All right. Hello, my name is SHAZZBARBARIC, SHAZZBARBARIC. It's a little early. We are catching up for last week. Catching up to Reading the Times. Reading the Times. This is for Wednesday, November 3rd. Wednesday, November 3rd. Right now it's Wednesday, November 7th. So we're going to do November 3rd, November 4th, November 5th. And then we'll have done all of last week. So if today we do 3 more videos, and tomorrow is the 8th, and we start doing them daily. The goal is to, I guess, have these out by noon. Wake up, spend 3-4 hours summarizing the news, and then 1 hour speaking it. Do all of that before noon Pacific Standard Time. I'm over here in California. My name is SHAZZBARBARIC. I'm running for California's 20th congressional district. Whatever that becomes after they finish redistricting. Redistricting will be the completion date is for December 27th. So we're going to do this for 2 months. Get a handle on the narratives that are being pushed in the mainstream media, and then as our basis, and then we also look at the non-mainstream media, everyone who's talking, get everyone on the same page. To what purpose? To what end? To create objective reality. It's one thing to criticize, it's another thing to offer a solution. Those who criticize without offering a solution are deconstructionists. And well, here, let's back up a little bit. I'm 39 years old. How old are you? Well, that's a good age. Well, in life, we all have to work with each other. No man is an island, especially in today's interconnected world. Even if you're in the woods living on your own, someone showed you how to do that. There are no wolf children. There used to be wolf children, children abandoned to the woods. We would find them, raised by wolves, raised by animals. Some of those children survived, literally. Look this up, Google. You find children who were thrown away, basically, who survived. They come back, and there are distinctive characteristics of them. Children who had no socialization, raised by animals, literally. They eat raw meat because if they survive, they're eating the stuff that animals eat, and animals don't have fire. They don't smile. They don't laugh. They hunch over and walk like an animal. They're animal, and you see, without socialization, what attributes of humanity we lose. So they don't smile. They don't laugh. They get along with each other. They create their own language between each other. They don't really talk. And this is after they put them in school. They tried to instill the humanity or bring the humanity back out of these children. That's a weird segue, but basically to mean that part of my humanity is in you and part of your humanity is in me. We need each other in order to bring out the humanity in ourselves. That is an extreme example, but our world is falling apart. It's pretty self-evident. A lot of things we're doing are self-destructive to individuals, to a planet as a whole. That's why I wear the sweater every single day. It's all about the peace. It's all about helping the planet. My theory, which is one shared by I think most educated people, is war is the largest danger to our planet. What I really like on this journey is I'm finding so many resources. Like I said, the answers are without, the humanity is without. We definitely want to work on the peace within, but acknowledging that if we're going to get to any solution, it's going to have to include participation from other people, which is the reason for the podcast. So I ran across the Stockholm Peace Institute. So there's institutes out there, people smarter than me, a lot more resources, been doing this a lot longer, working on these problems. And this institute out of Stockholm talks about just how much money has been contributed to war. And it's something like, from the United States alone, $10 trillion a year for the last 70 years. $700 trillion goes to the arms industry, the war industry. And if I propose, because I don't take anything at face value, I say, even in school and mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4, but show me your work, sir. And that was my problem too. You always get the answer, you don't show the work. We have to show the work. There's different levels of intelligence, and we want Democracy is participation. So these are the principles we're going to abide by. So let's break this down. Is there really that much power and energy going into the war machine? They say we can't have Medicare for all, we can't have healthcare in the United States. It would cost too much, a couple $1 billion. And meanwhile, we spend what the Iraq war, these wars in the Middle East are costing us trillions of dollars. And this institute shows us that there's $10 trillion a year being pumped into this war machine to kill people. They're passing a infrastructure bill here in the United States, $1.5 trillion over 10 years, however much it is. Meanwhile, $10 trillion a year going to kill people and going to control other countries to control their natural resources for the profit of private corporations, which the stock of which is owned by a very small percentage of the people. So it's not even people like, let's go into Iraq. Why not? Let's get that oil. The oil's not going towards you. It's not going to me. It's like, and that's why we're teasing out these narratives. Because in order to have a world of such injustice, in order to have a world of such insanity, of such manipulation, coercion, predation, of assholery and chicanery, you need a lot of lies. You need a lot of look over here while I do stuff over there. You need a lot of get mad at this instead of actually getting mad at the real problem. And so that's where I feel that my skill set, that's what I bring to the table. Because I'm one man. What is one man going to do but speak his truth, right? So where are the lies? Let's expose those. If I can expose the lies and the liars, my theory is that I will unleash the natural collective wisdom and courage and action of people like me. There's a lot of noble people out there, people who join the military not because I got in before 9/11. 9/11 happened in 2001. I saw 9/11 happen from the barracks in Monterey, Defense Language Institute. We all ran into the common barrack room. I woke up to the news. I have this alarm at the time that would go off and start public radio. So I woke up to firefighters running up and downstairs. What's going on? It's firefighters, buildings on fire. Going to the barracks, the media room. We have TVs where we play our video games and stuff. Everyone else is kind of streaming in. It's like what 6:30 or something. It's on the West Coast. We're in Monterey, California. And we see, I walk in right as soon as the second plane hits the building. No, it didn't fall yet. So we walked in, the second plane hit, and we're like everyone's just like, what? Like we're waking up, we're like, what? Just joined the military. Everyone's like, there's not going to be any other war. And all of us dumbass 18-year-olds were like, I wish we had a Vietnam. I wish I can go to war. I want them to make a movie about me. Right? What are the stories we tell ourselves? Why are the youth eager for conflict? Why are we raised looking to sacrifice for our country, for our empire? Maybe because we're raised every single morning, I pledge allegiance to the flag. I mean, what's the difference between I pledge allegiance to the flag and I pledge allegiance to Hitler? It's literally one movement difference. You're asking a child who doesn't know any better to commit their life for an abstract ideal. Not truth, justice, the American way. Allegiance, loyalty to a flag. Is that what I'm going to do? You won't be my political party. Pledge allegiance to this dipshit symbol. It's just a symbol. This is just a tool. It's a tool in order to express reality or a concept, because this isn't even reality, right? This is a metaphor. A metaphor is comparing two dissimilar things in order to tease out truth. So this is dissimilar to reality because this is just a sticker with some lines and some squigglies. But it represents a concept. There is the grounding sign for electricity, bringing in the concept of grounding energy into something that can disperse it, as opposed to, what happens if you don't ground energy? You have discharges, right? You have you have on every tall building, you have a lightning rod to allow the electrons. I'm not a scientist, but there's a positive charge that you want to release into the atmosphere, and the on the top, the antenna, the pointy thing, allows that discharge. And if you don't have that, you can have on a tall building, on a tree, whatever, an accumulation of charge. And if you have that accumulation of charge and the cloud comes over and it has an accumulation of charge, boom, you got that lightning strike, right? And so you allow that to slowly drip off. So that way, this is the nature of our world. An accumulation of energy without a release can cause a big boom, right? There's another way to discharge that accumulation of energy. You ground it, right? So you make sure that, and then there's all these dangers in these systems, which they're very simple metaphors to apply them to politics, to apply them to life. We can ground the excess energy in our political system, in our society, so that way we don't have these discharges. What is a mass shooter but a discharge? What is a protest that turns violent but a discharge, right? How can we ground this excess energy? Not even excess, just this energy in a peaceful means. And isn't that what democracy is supposed to be? A way for us to get together and solve our problems without these outbursts, without these discharges, right? We're not, people say, Thomas Jefferson says every now and then the tree of liberty must be watered by the blood of tyrants. That's a discharge. We don't need a revolution every now and then if we're doing our job. We're just getting together and talking with each other in order to figure out how to govern each other peacefully, right? Every now and then you just have to throw down and fight each other. No, that's failure. Violence is failure. And we haven't looked at all these wars of aggression as failures. The people who planned them, executed them, are still in power. I remember protesting Nancy Pelosi when she acquiesced to these wars of aggression, just rolled over, let George Bush do whatever he wanted. Why are they still in power? These are the ones who allowed the rollback of our civil liberties. They've allowed, and they admit their failures. Oh, we've been in Iraq, we've been in Afghanistan, nothing's happened. We have more terrorism, this and that. Then why haven't heads rolled? Not literally. Now's not the time to kill them, not yet. Let's take them through a trial, find out who's criminally negligent, malicious, and then whatever our justice system decides. There are martial crimes that have happened, I'm sure, but we have to do it in a transparent way, right? But right now is just to lay out the objective reality compared to the narratives we've been given. Life and death is on the line, though, right? Because people have died, and people are dying, right? So this is the conversation, the biggest conversation, the most important conversation, right? We're going to have it the right way, and that's why you have to have it in a scientific way, because we're talking about the greater system. We're talking about life and death of many people, many victims, but also possibly of the perpetrators. But it's been 13 minutes. Let us speak on what happened November 3rd, November 4th, November 5th. And then we will be caught up. I've been reviewing these for the last week, and I like the little notes that I give at the beginning. So I'll try to speak 5-10 minutes at the beginning of these, just to get what's on my mind. Move on. If you want to know who my motivation is, who my inspiration for my speaking style, look no further than Bob Ross. Happy Little Accidents. We're just going to talk a little bit about peace. Wait, Shaz, before you continue, ways to help spread the word. Talk to someone. Say Shaz is doing the thing. He's over there. He's doing the thing. I don't know if he's smart. I don't know if he's an idiot, but he's doing the thing. Maybe more people should pay attention if he is interesting enough to pay attention to. Spread the word. Number 2, Kickstarter. Oh, no, I keep saying Kickstarter because it says kick. Kick me $1, but Venmo. We tried Kickstarter. Google me, SHAZZBARBARIC Kickstarter. You'll find my failed attempts. But kick me $1 on Venmo. $1 might get you a sticker. It might get you a poem. Let's do that. You send me $1, I'll write you a poem. But $5, you definitely get a sticker. Heck, you might get 2 stickers. I don't know what the rules are. We're making them up as we go. But if you send me money on Venmo, $1, $5, or something, 50 cents, spare change, Venmo is at SHAZZBAR, SHAZZBAR. You'll see my face to the side. You'll see a little crown drawn in chalk. Okay, and if you really want to help me, I have a publishing company, Ten Bone Press, TenBonePress.com. There's 2 books we're selling right now. We're grounding this whole movement, whatever. Remember, we're trying to keep the energy peaceful as we have a democratic discussion in order to save the world and join all of our collective wisdom. We want to make sure that we have calm vibes. So the 2 books I'm selling at first are Dowday Shazz, TaoTeshazz.com, Dowday Shazz, and Good Barracks, GOODBARICS.com. And you can reserve those. Now, reserving them doesn't cost anything. If I get 5,000 reservations, I'll send you an invoice because then I can actually put the order into the printer. I have a really nice printer I've been talking to for a couple years now. I'd love to give him some work. Actually, the guy I've been talking to, I've been trying to sell my writing for a while now, pretty much all of my adult life. He went from the sales guy to now he's a manager. And every time I email him, he still emails me back saying, Shaz, we're ready to go when you are. So it's going to be printed in America by a good small company. I believe in their work. I love books. If you're in publishing, you have to not only write, but like love the books. So I buy books just because I like the way they look sometimes. So I found these guys just from a book that I really like the way that it was produced, very high quality, and just sometimes you see a book and it looks cheap, and sometimes you're like, I like the way they did this. So it's a good company. I'd like to give them some work. But yeah, I need orders first. So if you pre-order my books and I get a certain volume, I think over 500, but I'm aiming for 5,000, then we'll put in an order and I'll send you an invoice within 4 to 6 weeks. We'll have books. They'll be Dowday Shaz. I have other writing. Everything's free online. The concept of my publishing company is you can't copyright wisdom. So I release it all for free on a voluntary purchase basis. That's the idea about this too. Let's see what wisdom the New York Times has. Okay, how much minutes were those? 17. Okay. Let's try to keep it to 10 minutes, Chaz. All right. Eric Adams is elected mayor, New York City. Eric Leroy Adams, a former New York City police captain, whose attention-grabbing persona and keen focus on racial justice fueled a decades-long career in public life, was elected on Tuesday as the 110th mayor of New York and the second Black mayor in the city's history. Mr. Adams, who will take office on January 1st, faces a staggering set of challenges as the nation's largest city grapples with enduring consequences of the pandemic, including a precarious and unequal economic recovery and continuing concerns about crime and the quality of city life, all shaped by stark political divisions over how New York should move forward. In New York City, even as Republicans appeared poised for the possibility of slight gains in the city council, Democrats won the marquee contest easily. In New York City, the difficulties that Mr. Adams, 61, will encounter were apparent even as he celebrated his victory. There will be contracts to negotiate with city workers, and eventually, the federal aid that helped pay for some city priorities will dwindle. He's restored confidence that the city is a place where business can thrive, said Catherine S. Wild, who leads the Business Aligned Partnership for New York City, a new direction in NYC. Eric Adams will be the second Black mayor in New York's history. With methane and forest deals, climate summit offers hope after gloomy start. Capping off 2 days of speeches and meetings, President Biden on Tuesday said the United States pledged to be a partner with vulnerable countries confronting climate change, while expressing confidence that his own domestic climate agenda is on track to pass Congress, despite the wobbling of a key Senate Democrat this week. Mr. Biden told reporters the meetings had reestablished the United States as a leader on what he has called hold on a second. Remember, I'm using other people's office space, so I have to make sure I'm available in case they need me out of here. on what he has called the existential threat to humanity, saying America would keep raising its climate ambitions and that his engagement on the issue has drawn thanks from other heads of state. At an event unveiling the methane pledge, Mr. Biden and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission and a partner in hosting the event, framed the agreement as one of the most effective ways countries around the world could quickly begin fighting the effects of climate change. John Kerry, Mr. Biden's special envoy on climate change, said he expected new financial commitments to fulfill a long-delayed promise to provide $100 billion a year in aid for developing countries to fight and adapt to global warming. Literally, his tundra is burning. He has serious climate problems, and he has been mum on his willingness to do anything. The criticisms of China from US officials, including Mr. Biden's national security advisor's comment that the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter has an obligation to step up, drew a lengthy rebuke from China's foreign ministry and some Chinese media outlets on Tuesday. Mr. Biden said in his news conference that he expected to lead his $1.85 trillion climate change and social safety net climate bill, through Congress and into law. I was reviewing these in order to make my summary because we're going to start rolling out summaries of every week's news. And then I get to hear myself speak and decide, all right, you're speaking too fast, speaking too slow. It's good practice for public speaking too. Prominent conservatives back letting states limit guns in public. One of the longest continuous traditions in Anglo-American law are limits on the public carry of arms in populous areas. The New York law requires that people seeking a license to carry a handgun outside their homes show a proper cause. Two men who were denied the licenses they sought sued, along with the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, saying that the state makes it virtually impossible for the ordinary law-abiding citizen to obtain a license. California, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have similar laws, according to briefs filed in the case. Strict gun laws in Washington, D.C., the brief said, doubtless saved many lives during the January 6, 2021 insurrection. Mr. Ludwig, who advised Vice President Mike Pence during that fraught time, said many of the protesters did not bring their guns because they did not want to be in violation of the law. It would have been much worse, Mr. Ludwig said. Mr. Clement wrote that his client's quarrel was with the New York licensing system and that they did not challenge any of New York's many separate laws prohibiting handguns in specific sensitive places. When the Supreme Court revolutionized Second Amendment law in 2008 in District of Columbia versus Heller, establishing an individual's right to keep guns in the home for self-defense, the majority looked to history to determine the original meaning of the amendment. The court is poised to use a challenge to a Mississippi law that bars most abortions after 15 weeks to undermine and perhaps overturn Roe versus Wade, the 1973 decision that established a constitutional right to abortion. In a 2011 dissent, written while he was still an appeals court judge, Justice Kavanaugh said that the Supreme Court's precedents leave little doubt that courts are to assess gun bans and regulations based on text, history, and tradition, not by a balancing test. Though he acknowledged that analyzing the history and tradition of gun laws in the United States does not always yield easy answers. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, in a 2019 dissent, when she served on a federal appeals court, also looked to history to conclude that a law forbidding people with felony convictions from owning guns should not apply when the crimes in question were not violent. Minneapolis voters reject an amendment to replace the police department. Minneapolis residents rejected an amendment on Tuesday that called for replacing the city's long-troubled police department with a new Department of Public Safety. The ballot item emerged from anger after a Minneapolis police officer murdered George Floyd last year, galvanizing residents who saw the policing system as irredeemably broken. The amendment's failure showed that even in a liberal city where skepticism of the police runs deep, many Americans are not prepared to get rid of the police. Minneapolis leaders now face the challenge of filing staffing shortages in a police department that is about a third smaller than it was before Mr. Floyd's killing, and at a time when the city is facing the most homicides since the mid 1990s. Even though voters were bitterly divided over the charter amendment, the city has been largely united in a view that meaningful reforms to policing are needed. Under the amendment, the city council would have more oversight over the agency that replaced the police department, which would be focused on public health and, according to the ballot, could include licensed peace officers if necessary. Support of the measure, who largely steered away from supporters of the measure, who largely steered away from describing the plan as one to defund the police, framed it as a way to help their city move past the pain of the past 18 months and create a new, more equitable system. All done with the coffee. Facebook, citing societal concerns, plans to shut down facial recognition system. Jerome Pesenti, Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Meta, Facebook's newly named parent company, said in a blog post on Tuesday that the social network was making the change because of many concerns about the place of facial recognition technology in society. He added that the company still saw the software as a powerful tool, but every new technology brings with it potential for both benefit and concern, and we want to find the right balance. The decision shutters a feature that was introduced in December 2010 so that Facebook users could save time. Over the last decade, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, a Washington based privacy advocacy group, filed two complaints about Facebook's use of facial recognition with the FTC. When the FTC fined Facebook in 2019, it named the site's confusing privacy settings around facial recognition as one of the reasons for the penalty. The leak of internal documents by a former Facebook employee has provided an intimate look at the operations of the secretive social media company and renewed calls for better regulation of the company's wide reach into the lives of its users. In September, the Wall Street Journal published the Facebook Files, a series of reports based on leaked documents. During an interview with 60 Minutes that aired on October 3rd, Frances Haugen, a Facebook product manager who left the company in May, revealed that she was responsible for the leak of the internal documents. Documents from the Facebook papers show the degree to which Facebook knew of extremist groups on its site, trying to polarize American voters. Justice Department sues Penguin Random House over Simon and Schuster deals. The lawsuit focuses much of its attention on the market for the rights to books publishers believe will be top sellers, and documents several bidding wars between Penguin Random House and Simon and Schuster that went into high 6 and 7 figures. In response to the Justice Department's decision, Penguin Random House and Simon and Schuster issued a joint statement noting that Penguin Random House had not planned any reduction in the number of books acquired or in amounts paid for those acquisitions. The rationale for bringing the companies together, they said, was to find efficiencies that would save money on the back end, and that it had no plans to reduce the number of books it acquires or the amount it pays for them. Many of the most sought after books sell at auction, with multiple publishing houses bidding against one another. I should pay attention to this, right? The rules at Penguin Random House have allowed for some internal competition, but only if there was also an outside party involved, say Nupf and Riverhead, both owned by Penguin Random House, could compete as long as there was another publishing house in the game. In September, Marcus Dole, Penguin Random House's chief executive, had a virtual meeting with literary agents in an effort to address these concerns, with books by Barack and Michelle Obama, some of the most enormous blockbusters of recent years, visible behind him. The book business has been transformed by mergers and acquisitions in the past decade, a shift that accelerated with the merge of Penguin and Random House in 2013. That's a narrative of consolidation of media, right? Shutting down historical debate, China makes it a crime to mock heroes. China's Communist Party has long policed dissent, severely restricting public discourse of topics it deems to be politically incorrect. From Tibet to the Tiananmen Square protests, the campaign reflects an ambition by Mr. Xi to solidify a moral foundation for the Communist Party's supremacy, a theme the Chinese leader often invokes in speeches and articles. The party could want the party once could rely on the financial inducements of a booming economy and coercive control of the security state to cement its rule, but now appears to be using political and historical orthodoxy as a foundation, said Adam Nee, a director of the China Policy Center in Australia and editor of China's Story. Mr. Xi, preparing for what is likely to be a third term as Communist Party leader beginning next year, will use a gathering of the party elite in Beijing next week to adopt a new resolution on the party's history, an official summation of the past and its lessons. Last month, a former journalist, Luo Jiangping, was detained in Hainan after he wrote a blog questioning the rationale for China's intervention in the Korean War and the catastrophic cost for those volunteers sent to fight and die in it. John Delury, a professor of Chinese studies at Yonsei University in Seoul, and author of a forthcoming book about the war, said that even within the limits of political censorship, Chinese scholars have done a lot of great work on the war and other historical events since the founding of the People's Republic of China. Torn from parents in the Belgian Congo, women seek reparations. Like thousands of other mixed race children born under colonial rule in Belgian Congo, the five girls, the children of African mothers and European fathers, were taken from their homes by the authorities and sent to religious schools hundreds of miles away, growing up in poverty and suffering from malnutrition and physical abuse. The Belgian civil servants snatched some children from their families or coerced the parents of others into handing over their children to Catholic institutions cooperating with the state. In 2019, the Belgian government apologized for the systemic kidnapping, segregation, deportation, and forced adoption of biracial children during its colonial rule. In Canada, in Canada, a national commission concluded that a government's residential school program that separated at least 150,000 Indigenous children from their families from 1883 to 1996 amounted to cultural genocide. The discoveries earlier this year of hundreds of unmarked graves of children who died in the schools has prompted a new reckoning over the government's historical policies. What is clear is that mixed race children were seen as a threat, according to Delphine Lowers, the lead archivist of Resolution Metis, a state run research project created after the Belgian parliament apologized in 2018. So the Belgian state decided to confine the mixed race children in an in between, liminal space, where they were excluded from both categories. The five plaintiffs grew up together in a Catholic school in Katende, in what is the province of Kasai in the Democratic Republic of Congo today. US US Russia engagement deepens as CIA travels to Moscow. William J. Burns, the CIA director, met with a top advisor to President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday, leading a delegation of American officials on a 2-day visit to, let's see, okay, on a 2-day visit. Yeah. So the CIA director met with Vladimir Putin. It's just fun to say that name, right? Vladimir Putin, leading a delegation of American officials on a 2-day visit to the Russian capital that served as the latest evidence of heightened engagement between the two global adversaries. The surprise visit was something of a merger of Mr. Burns' current role as intelligence chief and his past job as a senior American diplomat and State Department official. American officials have also said that Moscow has been helpful in ongoing talks with Iran about its nuclear program. After landing on Tuesday, Mr. Burns sat down with Mr. Patrushev, who is the secretary of the Kremlin Security Council and is widely seen as a most powerful figure among the intelligence officials in Mr. Putin's inner circle. Russian officials have publicly floated the possibility of a second meeting between Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden before the end of the year, although the White House has not confirmed that another summit is under consideration. American officials would likely want to see some further progress on the issues discussed in Geneva before agreeing to another meeting. Dozens killed in ISIS attack on military hospital in Afghanistan's capital. The attack, which included armed gunmen and at least one suicide bomber, targeted the 400-bed Sadr Mohammed Dawud Khan Military Hospital in one of Kabul's most affluent neighborhoods, where both wounded soldiers who fought for the former government and Taliban fighters were being treated. Zabihullah Mujahid, a spokesman for the Taliban, said the attack was carried out by several members of the Islamic State, including a suicide bomber who detonated his explosives at the gate of the hospital. A car full of explosives outside the hospital also exploded, wounding dozens, and several Taliban fighters were killed and wounded in the ensuing gun battle, Mr. Mujahid said. One doctor in the hospital, who declined to be named out of fear for his safety, said that the gunman had entered a ward filled with wounded Taliban fighters and shot them in their beds. Qadi Saeed Kosti, a spokesman for the Ministry of Interior, confirmed on Twitter that there had been at least one explosion in the hospital and that Taliban forces were responding to the attack. The Sardar Mohammed Daud Khan Military Hospital has been attacked repeatedly in the past years by both the Islamic State and the Taliban. Once a climate leader, Brazil falls short in Glasgow. Brazil, a global climate leader turned environmental offender under President Jair Bolsonaro, approached the United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow ready to prove that it was changing course with commitments to create a green jobs program, cut carbon emission, and curb deforestation. On Monday, Brazil committed to cutting emissions in half by 2030, achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, and ending illegal deforestation by 2028, a step up from its pledge last year. In one video shared in one of the summit's side events, Mr. Bolsonaro called Brazil a green power and declared that in the fight against climate change, we have always been a part of the solution, not the problem. On Tuesday, Brazil joined more than 100 other countries in pledging to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Still, Mr. Bolsonaro's absence goes against the argument that Brazil is reversing course, said Natalie Unterstel, the president of the Institute Talanoa, a climate policy think tank. In 2015, as part of the Paris Agreement, Brazil had promised to slash carbon emissions by 43%. Once again, Brazil fails to show ambition. Then there is the matter of Brazil's record. Biden tries to reassert American leadership and his own. President Biden's major goal for his second foreign trip since taking office was to reassert America's ability to lead the world on climate change before it's too late. From the moment he landed in Rome on Friday for the Group of 20 meeting and then traveled to the climate summit in Glasgow, Mr. Biden took on the role of a traveling salesman, exulting in the backslapping, personalized politics that he believes makes him a strong negotiator and can translate into substantive deal making. Confronted with a lack of consensus among world leaders on how to move forward globally, and with his climate agenda hanging in the balance in Congress at home, Mr. Biden's time in Glasgow laid bare the reality that the personal style he prefers had not helped him close the gulf between his ambition and what he has been able to achieve. Representative Ro Khanna, a California Democrat who has been working with the president to refashion his climate agenda, said in an interview that Mr. Biden told him ahead of his trip that American prestige was on the line. Mr. Biden is eager to establish himself as a global leader of collective action on climate policy. If Mr. Biden can secure passage, the bill, which includes $555 billion to fight climate change, largely through tax incentives for low emission sources of energy, would be the most ambitious plan adopted by the United States. Break because, well, first of all, clear my nose, but also I listen to these all the time. I try not to speak too much, but I do take the notes out of when I'm speaking to put into my summaries. And so there's thoughts that I don't want to lose. The reason why we're doing this in a systemic way is so once I get this into a process, I can actually take this process once we have money and apply it backwards. And we could do the New York Times since it was founded. Um, when we're addressing propaganda and malicious deceit, manipulation, emotional manipulation, you do it in a scientific way so you can track it scientifically. So we can actually not only claim things, but then we can put them up to dispute. If you don't agree with what I say, if I err, tell me but where. Um, so we're going to find out the authors who seem to be lying the most. Maybe we tie them into the State Department because we do have, since the 70s, the CIA admitted it can play the media like a Wurlitzer. So we know that there are State Department employees working in the media in order to push narratives. And we might also just have people who are biased because of their values, because of their institutions. But looking at what they've written over time, Thomas Friedman, what's his name? That David dude. We can look at their values just based off of their writings. People can claim certain set of values, but thoughts, words, and actions. What are you actually saying and doing over time? Those are your values. What you claim, people lie. And how do we catch people in lies? That's going to be one of the main things we're trying to do with the system I'm creating. But with the right process, once you throw money at it, you can scale it up. I mean, that's what Google, that's what these other startup companies do. You develop processes. Then you go to a funder and you say, look at these processes work. Let's now apply money in order to scale them up. So I'm only doing the New York Times daily as one person starting 2 weeks ago. But we're going to scale it up to do anything that's ever written in the New York Times to actually get a comprehensive view of the narratives. And maybe we scale it up to do everything in every major media source. I would love to go after The Economist. I would love to go after some of these other. We have to identify the outlets of propaganda in a scientific way if we're really going to fight this war over reality in a mature fashion. Find out where the sources of lies are coming from and confront them on that front. If we don't do that, the alternative, which is very dangerous, and this is what Trump and the other side is pushing, is that you just ignore it. Like when I talk to people and they say, "Oh, the New York Times, that's just a bunch of lies." No, it's not all lies though. I've learned things by that's why also you do this. It is a source of information. If it was just lies, the majority of people would ignore it because it'd be obvious. And I just read a book recently on con artists about this. Con artists don't come in with 100% bullshit. They have a little bit of truth, and then they wrap their lie around it. If there was no truth, no hook, they call it the hook. If there was nothing enticing that actually seems verifiable or is verifiable, it wouldn't be a good con. So there's a little bit of truth, and then it's spun into a never-ending cycle of deceit. And then there's a consistent technique they use to do this. And so we do need to tease out the truth from these resources and then perhaps create our own resources in order to better inform ourselves without so much deceit. But when you just ignore all of the media at face value saying they're all lying to you, you become ignorant. And then that's what's happening with these Trump people. They're becoming dependent since they recognize that the current media is lying to us, and it has been lied us into these wars, continually pushing narratives, which people instinctually feel, I keep listening to you and I seem less informed. Jerry Seinfeld has a funny quote. He says, it's funny that all the news in the world every single day seems to fit exactly into the newspaper. It's obviously not all the news in the world. It's a chosen set of narratives to push an agenda. But it's also reporting. There's some good people in here, I'm sure. I've been educated, like I said. So don't discount it all the way, or else you're only dependent on the media sources that you trust, and you should never trust anyone completely, right? Trust but verify was one of the best advices I got in business when I was doing business. And that's what I would tell people when we signed agreements, we signed contracts. Even though we have good handshakes and good verbal, you still sign the agreement. And I would tell them good fences make good neighbors, trust but verify. I like you. And we have an outline, a framework of what we're going to do, but now let's put it in paper, because this is going to just solidify the good feeling we already have. I trust you, but we should also verify, and with everyone else. And then good people of character, are going to understand that process. That's when you smoke out the con artist, because we don't catch them all. We don't always catch deceit through that instinctual recognition. All of us can be fooled. You have to be humble in this process. So that's why you trust, but you verify. You create a system that makes up for your possible biases or your possible blind spots. That's what we're doing here. Anyways, global leader pledges to end deforestation. Did I read? Oh, shoot. I forgot where I was. I don't think we've done this one. Global leaders pledge to end deforestation by 2030. Leaders of more than 100 countries, including Brazil, China, Russia, and the United States, vowed at climate talks in Glasgow to end deforestation by 2030 in a landmark agreement that encompasses some 85% of the world's forest. Meanwhile, the Amazon is already on the brink and can't survive years more deforestation. Forest loss in 2020. There were bright spots, but the total lost acreage increased by 12% overall from the year before, according to new research. Nevertheless, the pledge underscores a growing awareness of the role of nature in tackling the climate crises, something Britain has sought to highlight at the climate summit known as COP26. One program recognized in the Paris Climate Accord, the agreement among nations to work together in an effort to fight climate change, seeks to pay forested nations for reducing tree loss. In 2014, an international pact known as the New York Declaration on Forests aimed to end deforestation by 2030, and a United Nations plan announced 3 years later built on that pledge, yet deforestation continued. Supporters of the new agreement point out that it expands the number of countries and comes with specific steps to save forests. China suffered heavy forest loss as its population and industry grew over the past decades, though more recently, it has pledged to regrow forests and expand sustainable tree farming. Ethiopia declared state of emergency as rebels advance towards the capital. The Tigrayans, who have been fighting the government for the past year, have joined forces with another rebel group as they advance on the capital, Addis Ababa. In recent days, Mr. Abiy has blamed his losses on unidentified foreigners he says are fighting alongside the Tigrayans. The Tigrayans, for their part, say they are fighting to break a siege that is strangling their region and starving their people. We need more than drips. Human rights groups have also accused Tigrayan fighters of abuses, including the killing of Eritrean refugees, although not on the same scale as Ethiopian troops. The Ethiopian government accused Tigrayan fighters of killing youth residents in Kombolcha in recent days, but provided no evidence. In recent weeks, for reasons that are unclear, the Eritreans have been nowhere to be seen in the latest fighting, Tigrayan and Western officials said. Building in Nigeria has abnormalities before collapse. Construction on a high rise building that collapsed Monday in Lagos, killing at least 20 people, has been ordered halted earlier this year after inspectors found abnormalities, the authorities said Tuesday. The 21-story structure was cordoned off in June after it had failed to meet structural specifications, said the Lagos State Deputy Governor, Obafemi Hamzat. The Lagos state government said on Tuesday it was setting up an independent panel composed of professional engineering and architecture groups to look into the latest collapse. At a first step, the Lagos governor, Babajide San, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, announced that he had indefinitely suspended Mr. Oki, the building control agency head. Officials voiced assurances that the inquiry would be thorough. We wish to state that there will be no cover-up in the search for truth in this incident. Gabenga Omotoso, the Lagos State Commissioner for Information and Strategy, said in a statement, 9 people, all men, had been rescued according to Lagos state officials. Palestinian families reject deal in area that helped set off Gaza conflict. A group of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem, whose looming eviction led to an 11-day war in Gaza, rejected a compromise on Tuesday that would have allowed them to stay in their homes for several decades if they agreed to pay nominal rent to a Jewish settler group that courts had ruled are the building's real owners. The agreement, proposed by Israel's highest court, did not recognize them as the owners of their homes, they said, and it would obscure what they perceive as a wider Israeli strategy to displace Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Palestinians see the case as emblematic of an Israeli effort to cement control over the eastern half of the city, ultimately making it harder for East Jerusalem to become the capital of a future Palestinian state. In recent decades, settler groups have moved into several neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, prompting dozens of eviction battles. The Foreign Ministry has previously described the case as a real estate dispute between private parties that the Palestinian leadership has exploited to incite violence in Jerusalem. The dispute in Sheikh Jarrah has its roots in the 19th century when the city was governed by the Ottoman Empire. After Israel captured East Jerusalem in 1967, the land was returned to the Jewish Trust, which then sold it to various settler groups. Intimate portraits of Mexico's third gender, muxes. There, alongside a community of fellow muxes, people who are born male but who adopt roles and identities associated with women, she will vie to be crowned the queen of the ceremony. As Zapotecs, an indigenous people of Mexico, they are part of a community that has long accepted and celebrated the muxes, who are broadly considered a third gender. Many muxes assume roles within Zapotec society that are traditionally associated with women. They cook, embroider garments, work as hairdressers, complete household chores, care for children and elderly relatives. Estrella is among them. Alongside other interests, she designs the elaborate embroidery of traditional Zapotec dresses, full of flowers and other natural elements that flood everyday celebration or festivity on the isthmus with color. My first visit to Juchitán in 2014 coincided with a series of festivities during which seemingly everyone I encountered, young, old, men, women, muxes, danced, ate, and drank in celebration. Notably, muxe children are traditionally forbidden from leaving their parental homes to start their own families or live independently with their partners. For Holocaust scholar, another confrontation with neo-Nazi hate. Dr. Lipstadt, a professor of modern Jewish history and Holocaust studies at Emory University, is scheduled to appear in Charlottesville on Wednesday for the plaintiffs in Sinas versus Kessler, a civil case brought against 24 neo-Nazis and white nationalist groups who organized the 2017 Unite the Right rally in the college town. Mr. Lipstadt declined to comment for this article. Attorneys for the plaintiffs barred her from interviews before her testimony. But in a 48-page report she prepared for the trial, she wrote that this fear of active replacement by the Jew derived directly from the historical underpinnings of anti-Semitism is a central feature of contemporary anti-Semitism. Two animuses, racism and anti-Semitism, come together in the concept of a white genocide or white replacement theory. Dr. Lipstadt wrote in the report, their animating ideology, great replacement theory, the false idea that religious and racial minorities are bent on eradicating white Christians or replacing them in society, has moved from the fringe to the mainstream, Dr. Lipstadt and civil rights groups say. Dr. Lipstadt cites multiple examples of Unite the Right organizers extending great replacement theory to members of other races, including an online appeal by the white nationalist Richard Spencer, a defendant in the Charlottesville case, who is representing himself. Will you just roll over and let them run roughshod over white culture and white people? And will you join us? Dr. Lipstadt received her undergraduate degree from City College of New York and her master's degree and PhD from Brandeis University. In 1993, Dr. Lipstadt published Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory. The English writer David Irving, who Dr. Lipstadt described in the book as the most dangerous Holocaust denier, responded by suing her and her publisher, Penguin Books, for libel in Britain, whose system differs from the American in that it reverses the burden of proof, putting the onus on Dr. Lipstadt to prove that the statements at issue were true. Clashing portrayals of Kyle Rittenhouse in testimony on Kenosha shootings. On the first day of testimony in the homicide trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, prosecutors and defense lawyers offered sharply divergent portrayals of Mr. Rittenhouse, an 18-year-old from Illinois who faces the prospect of life in prison. Prosecutors began their case by describing Mr. Rittenhouse as a dangerous type of tourist, a teenager who came to Kenosha, Wisconsin, bearing a military-style semi-automatic rifle that he possessed illegally, bought for him by a friend because he was only 17 at the time. Mr. Rittenhouse shot 3 men, killing 2, during protest against police violence in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He faces 6 counts, including first-degree intentional homicide. Out of hundreds of people that came to Kenosha during that week, the hundreds of people that were out on the street that week, the evidence will show that the only person who killed anyone was the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse. Among the 3 witnesses whom prosecutors called to testify on Tuesday was Mr. Black, the friend who bought the gun for Mr. Rittenhouse during a trip to Ladysmith, Wisconsin, several months before the Kenosha shootings. On the day of the shootings, Mr. Black testified that he and Mr. Rittenhouse went together to downtown Kenosha, with Mr. Black toting his own nearly identical gun, where they eventually joined other men guarding a set of used car lots. Supreme Court hears free speech case on politicians' censure. The basic question at a Supreme Court argument on Tuesday was whether elected bodies can violate the First Amendment when they censure their members for something they said. To put another way, are censures, which are formal reprimands and a kind of punishment, a form of free speech or a threat to it? The answer to the question, several justices said, did not seem difficult. Unless there's something special about the word censure, and maybe there is, this is a very easy case, said Justice Samuel A. Alito. One person said something derogatory about another person, and then the other person responds by saying something derogatory about the first person. Nobody's free speech rights are violated there. The case was brought by David Wilson, a former elected trustee of the House Houston Community College system and an energetic critic of its work. Justice Barrett added, if the same member walks out onto the steps and gives a press conference and repeats those exact same racial slurs, that is not subject to censure ever. That's correct, Mr. Kimberly said. Justice Clarence Thomas appeared wary of having courts become involved in the rough and tumble of politics. Justice Stephen G. Breyer echoed that point, saying that if we get into the business of starting to really oversee this, then we've changed the government structure significantly. Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh said the court should consider a narrow ruling. I thought the issue, all we have to decide was merely a censure does not trigger a retaliation claim. Sopan Joshi, a lawyer for the federal government arguing in support of the systems board, said there were ample historical examples to establish that a censure resolution adopted by elected body against one of its members does not abridge that member's freedom of speech. Richard A. Morris, a lawyer for the systems board in the case, Houston Community College System versus Wilson, number 20804, said the power to censure was essential in the current political climate. Prominent conservatives back letting states limit guns in public. That's funny. They use political climate, and I was just using the metaphor earlier of grounding energy. Flash politics, the Friendship Party, grounding energy, because that has to do with climate too, right? Too much charge in the ionosphere. And so the political climate, I hope, through my tools and my process, becomes less charged and less violent, less lightning strikes. All of this is good. Good metaphor should always be extended. And that's how you test a metaphor, by extending it. So when someone gives me a metaphor, we talk about it. That's the fun part of language. You give me an image, and then I expand upon that image. I give it back to you, and we play with it. And sometimes we create whole worlds of metaphors. And in doing that, you find where the metaphor fails, which eventually, some of them can extend indefinitely. Those are very good metaphors, analogies. Those are whole worlds. You can come up with a whole piece of fiction, or it becomes nonfiction because you find out an actual case study in real life, and they're no longer dissimilar things, but they're actually the same thing, the same phenomena. Through language, we could explore our world in a very creative and entertaining and educational way. But also, sometimes people think they have a really good metaphor, and you just, a couple turns of phrases, take the metaphor and you kind of turn it like the jewel, and you look at different ways that the light reflects off of it, and you realize it's flawed. And that's how you win an argument too, is you take someone's best argument, their best metaphor, and you just show them how it's actually, and that's where you find deceit, maliciousness. False equivocacy is what we would say too. Paul D. Clement, a former Solicitor General in the Bush administration who represents the two men and gun rights group challenging the New York law, took a different view of the relevant history. One of the longest continuous traditions in England. We already did this one. Let me make sure. Real quick. Prominent conservatives backlighting states. It was on the front page too. Yeah. Sometimes they have the front page articles and then they're repeated later. I'm glad I got that. I wonder how many times I've read the same article. Lawyer, Shaz is not perfect, you will find. We all make mistakes. Happy little accidents. Lawyer for Rust, assistant director, says checking gun was not his job. Lawyer for the assistant director on the film Rust, who law enforcement officials said had handed a gun to the actor Alec Baldwin before it discharged a live round that killed the cinematographer, said in an interview on Fox News Monday that it was not his responsibility to check the weapon. The assistant director, David Halls, had told the detective shortly after the fatal shooting that when the movie's armorer had shown him in the firearm to inspect its round, he should have checked all of them, but didn't, according to an affidavit released by the sheriff's office in Santa Fe County, New Mexico. According to another affidavit, Mr. Halls had called out "cold gun" indicating that the gun did not contain any live rounds, and handed it to Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Hall's lawyer, Lisa Tarraco, contended in an interview with Martha McCollum on Fox News that the main responsibility for checking the gun was the film's armorer, claiming that it was not the assistant director's job. What I can tell you is that expecting an assistant director to check a firearm is like telling the assistant director to check the camera angle or telling the assistant director to check sound or lighting, she said in an interview. It's not the assistant director's job. If he chooses to check the firearm because he wants to make sure that everyone's safe, he can do that. But that's not his responsibility. The film director, Joel Souza, who was wounded in the shooting, later told the detective that the firearm was checked by the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and that then the firearm was checked by the assistant director, David Halls, who then gives it to the actor using the firearm, according to another affidavit released as part of a search warrant application. Larry Zanoff, a veteran armorer whose past films include Django Unchained and Fantastic Four, said it was common practice on a film set for the first assistant director to be the one of the people responsible for inspecting guns on set, including checking to make sure a gun is empty before the armorer hands it to an actor. In an affidavit released by the Sheriff's Department, a detective, Joel Cano, wrote that he learned that shortly before the shooting, Mr. Halls had picked the gun up from a gray cart that had been set up by Miss Gutierrez Reed and had taken it onto the set, where he handed it to Mr. Baldwin and yelled, "Cold gun." Ms. Torraco disputed the chain of events in the Fox News interview, saying the idea that my client grabbed the gun off a prop cart and handed it to Mr. Baldwin absolutely did not happen. Ms. Torraco said she had heard differing accounts from crew members on set. Alvin Bragg becomes first black DA in Manhattan. Mr. Bragg had said he would show leniency to defendants who commit low-level crimes and has emphasized the importance of accountability for the police and the office's prosecutors. Mr. Bragg will be working in close partnership with the police department run by Eric Adams, who won the race for mayor on Tuesday night. In an interview earlier on Tuesday, Mr. Bragg pointed towards experiences that he said would inform his work and set him apart from his predecessors. Mr. Bragg's policy positions are largely in line with others who have won office over the past decade, including Rachel Rollins in Boston and Kim Foxx in Chicago. Mr. Bragg won handily, and the Associated Press called the race for him just before 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday. A lifelong resident of Harlem, Mr. Bragg began running for district attorney more than 2 years ago and slowly accumulated support from local political clubs and unions, and from figures including Representative Gerald L. Nadler and Preet Bharara, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, who hired Mr. Bragg as a federal prosecutor in Manhattan. Glenn Youngkin, a Republican financier, defeats Terry McAuliffe in the Virginia governor's race. Republicans claim the governorship of Virginia for the first time in more than a decade on Wednesday, electing the businessman Glenn Youngkin and presenting their party with a formula for how to exploit President Biden's vulnerabilities and evade the shadow of Donald J. Trump in Democratic-leaning states. Mr. Youngkin, 54, a wealthy former private equity executive making his first run for office, elevated education and taxes while projecting a suburban dad demeanor to demonstrate he was different from Mr. Trump without saying so outright. We're going to continue that fight. Significantly, Mr. Trump appeared unusually content to be kept at arm's length by Mr. Youngkin, remaining mostly silent as a Republican candidate declined to invite him to the state. For Republicans, particularly those uneasy with Mr. Trump and battered by the party's string of losses on his watch, Mr. Youngkin's triumph delivered a moment of exultation. Clad in a fleece vest and sporting a smile on the campaign trail, Mr. Youngkin happily claimed support from the so-called Never Trumpers and Forever Trumpers, while otherwise voicing a center-right agenda in a state where Republicans have not won statewide since 2009, in part because Mr. McAuliffe was so dedicated to his strategy of inserting Mr. Trump into the race Mr. Youngkin evaded scrutiny about his own views on policy, which, on issues like abortion and same sex marriage, were to the right of most Virginians. Democrats add drug cost curbs to social policy plan, pushing for vote. House Democrats reached a deal on Tuesday to add a measure to curb prescription drug costs to President Biden's 1.85 trillion social safety net plan, agreeing to allow the government for the first time to negotiate prices for medications covered by Medicare as they pushed for a quick vote on the bill. Most drugs would still be granted patient exclusivity for 9 years before negotiations could start, and more complex drugs, called biologics, would be protected for 12 years. Fixing prescription drug pricing has consistently been a top issue for Americans year after year, including the vast majority of both Democrats and Republicans who want to see a change because they simply can't afford their medications, said Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York and the majority leader. Today, we have taken a massive step forward in helping alleviate that problem. Speaker Nancy Pelosi of California declared that Democrats will deliver strong drug price negotiations to lower prices for our seniors and halt Big Pharma's outrageous price hikes above inflation. Stephen J. Ubel, the president and chief executive of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, the industry's main trade group, criticized the deal. The prescription drug compromise was hard fought and required Democrats to overcome an onslaught of lobbying by the powerful pharmaceutical industry, which succeeded in weakening their initial proposal to allow the government to negotiate prices on a broader universe of drugs. Her office then released a statement saying that she welcomed a new agreement on a historic, transformative Medicare drug negotiation plan that will reduce out-of-pocket costs for seniors, ensuring drug prices cannot rise faster than inflation, and save taxpayer dollars and protect innovation to ensure Arizonans and Americans continue to have access to life-saving medications and new cures and therapeutics. The agreement on state and local taxes were still being hammered out on Tuesday, but Democrats said it would suspend a $10,000 cap on the so-called SALT deduction for 5 years. If the Supreme Court claims power over gun carry laws, it will be making a grave mistake. The Supreme Court will soon decide whether Americans have a constitutional right to carry loaded concealed weapons in public and in public places, wherever and whenever they believe they might need their guns for self-defense. At stake in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin is whether the Supreme Court will claim for itself the power to decide when and where Americans can carry loaded handguns in public, a power that the Constitution reserves for the people and their elected representatives. The court should affirm the constitutionality of New York's public carry statute and other statutes nationwide that limit and restrict the public carry of handguns. For the justices to begin deciding for the people exactly where and when a person has the right to carry a handgun in public would be to establish the court as essentially a national review board for public carry regulations, precisely the kind of constitutional commandeering of the democratic process that conservatives and conservative jurists have long lamented in other areas of the law, such as abortion. The District of Columbia bans handguns in public in many places, including at or near protests in broad areas near the Capitol and the White House and on public transit. As a matter of public policy, some justices might favor an absolute or near absolute right to carry a handgun in public. We should all know less about each other. In 2017, after the shock of Brexit and then Donald Trump's election, Christopher Bale, a professor of sociology and public policy at Duke University, set out to study what would happen if you forced people out of their social media echo chambers. At the time, a lot of concern about the internet's role in political polarization centered around what the digital activist Eli Pariser once called filter bubbles, a term for the way an increasingly personalized internet traps people in self-reinforcing information silos. Republicans, in particular, became much more conservative when they followed the Democratic bot, and Democrats became a little bit more liberal. Social media platforms have justified themselves with the idea that connecting people would make the world more open and humane. People in conservative communities don't need to hear about it every time San Francisco considers renaming a public school. In 2017, Deb Roy, director of the MIT Center for Constructive Communication, and former chief media scientist at Twitter, held informal meetings in small towns to talk to people about social media. Several times, people told him they'd given up speaking to neighbors or others in town after seeing them express their opinions online. That's the exact opposite of what my theory is, that we should talk to each other. The road to climate recovery goes through the wild woods. Territorial rights of indigenous people must be recognized, protected, forest areas expanded, and roads and industry avoided in still intact forests. More ominous, the often overlooked northern boreal forests grow in soils that hold carbon equal to 190 times the global carbon emissions of last year and are being relentlessly diced and burned. In the tropics, intact forests store an average of twice the carbon held in forests bisected by roads or otherwise disturbed by development. Protecting tropical forests can secure 7 to 10 times as much carbon through 2050 as replanting forests. Protecting these forests is crucial to maintaining the homes and way of life of thousands of forest cultures, people who speak as many as a quarter of Earth's languages. Leaders determined to save climate cooling forests can support these forest guardians by enacting and maintaining land policies that ensure indigenous peoples' inalienable rights for the future territories. A quietly big idea on how we think about the homeless. Are the unhoused a people? If the answer is yes, then don't they deserve equal protection under the law? These questions were broached last week by the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California in a long report titled Outside the Law: The Legal War Against Unhoused People. Rather than think of homelessness as a condition, the authors argue, lawmakers should protect those who live on the street the same way the Constitution in California law protects groups based on race, gender, or religion. If, say, a city enacted a policy that made it illegal for homeless people to use public bathrooms, advocates for the homelessness advocates for the homeless could then sue. California's homelessness crisis can sometimes feel like a never-ending series of catastrophes, but Eve Garrow, one of the report's authors, believes we have reached an inflection point when it comes to the treatment of unhoused people. Local governments have become increasingly sophisticated in finding ways to discriminate against and persecute unhoused people. Most Californians agree something has to change. While there's a lot of inefficiency and often a sense of hopelessness on the side of helping the unhoused, law enforcement and hostile governments have taken decisive, coordinated action to clear out camps, jail individuals, and pass legislation that effectively makes being homeless illegal within city limits. Is there some danger or at least some irresponsibility in extending protections to people based on what some might call a temporary or even deserved condition? Will it lead to protections for any people who want to proclaim themselves a group? I don't actually have any fears about that, Carroll said. As the Fed prepares to slow support, attention shifts to rate increase. Economists increasingly expect the Fed to move its policy rate up to near zero, where it has been since March 2020, as soon as next summer. Investors, as a whole, now put better than 50% odds on rate increases by the Fed's June 2022 meeting, based on a CME Group tool that tracks market pricing. Raising rates poses a risky trade-off for Fed policymakers. The risk is not really about the Fed beginning its rate hikes behind the curve, said Skanda Amarnath, executive director of Employ America, a group focused on encouraging policies that help the workforce. The risk is that the Fed overreacts to this, that markets are penciling in rate increases more quickly could suggest that they are optimistic about the economy's chances, said Neil Duda, head of U.S. economics at Renaissance Macro. The Fed has said that before lifting rates, it wants to see the economy return to full employment and inflation that exceeds its 2% target and is on track to average it over time. Europe fears that rising cost of climate action is stirring anger. Surging energy prices have complicated Europe's lofty goals, leaving governments scrambling to offset the impact on households as signs of popular discontent rise. Europe has leaned heavily on natural gas to power homes and businesses while it builds out green energy infrastructure. In Spain, the government has attempted to take emergency steps to redirect profits from energy companies to consumers after demonstrators in some towns smashed windows at energy company offices, and thousands of poor families switched off power because they couldn't pay. President Emmanuel Macron is subsidizing energy bills in France through the winter and paying €100 a month to low earners after small protests emerged recently in central France, a yellow vest heartland. In Greece, the government is trying to soothe ire by redirecting money earned from Greece's carbon emissions trading scheme toward household energy subsidies, while making sure to publicize that the funds come from a tool to combat climate change. A seismic upheaval in the way goods and services are produced will affect millions of jobs in fields as diverse as energy, agriculture, construction, shipping, finance, engineering, retail, and even fashion, altering the social welfare needs of people who will require new skills and training to adapt. Corporate climate pledges often ignore a key component: supply chains. Emissions from supply chains and waste are hugely important, said Tom Cumberledge, an associate director at the Carbon Trust, which works with companies, governments, and others to create carbon reducing plans. The climate is being hurt by absolute emissions. Walmart said it is difficult to accurately measure carbon contributions from its many suppliers, and the company does not disclose whether total emissions in its supply chain have been increasing or declining each year. The company said about 95% of the carbon emissions related to its business comes from its supply chain. The number of companies voluntarily submitting their emissions reports and reduction goals to the Science Based Targets Initiative, a nonprofit that assesses and improves company targets, doubled this year to more than 2,000, said Alberto Carrillo Pineda, the co founder of the initiative. Last week, the organization released the criteria companies will have to meet to reach net zero goals later, and they include steep reduction in emissions from supply chains. Mr. Carrillo Pineda noted that the companies provide the data voluntarily, so there is no full guarantee that a company is always including every emission. Eventually, companies may be forced to do so. Democrats push for agreement on tax deduction. Democrats were readying an agreement on Tuesday that would repeal a cap on the amount of state and local taxes that homeowners can deduct as a part of a broader $1.85 trillion spending bill, a move that could amount to a significant tax cut for wealthy Americans in liberal states. Liberal Democrats have scoffed at the push to include the costly proposal in the domestic policy package, particularly as party leaders have curtailed or eliminated other spending priorities as they pare down a $3.5 trillion blueprint to appease moderates and conservative leaning Democrats. What exists is unacceptable, and one way or another, it will be dealt with. It remains unclear whether the agreement would apply broadly or if Democrats plan to impose an income cap to prevent the wealthiest Americans from receiving what amounts to a tax cut. To get around that, the 5-year suspension assumes that the cap is reinstated in 2026 for another 5 years, allowing Democrats to use a budget sleight of hand to show its removal as revenue neutral in the traditional 10-year window that lawmakers look to when considering a bill's impact on the federal deficit. Some Democrats appeared confident that lawmakers would act again in 5 years to prevent the cap from going back into effect. Democrats accuse Republicans of using the cap to pay for other tax cuts for the rich and to penalize liberal states. BP's profits rise as oil and gas prices soar. BP said on Tuesday that higher oil and natural gas prices had led to sharply higher earnings in the third quarter. Prices for oil have steadily risen over the last year as economies have expanded since pandemic lockdowns, and BP joined other oil companies in reporting a big jump in quarterly earnings. BP, which is based in London, said that it received about $66.39 on average for a barrel of oil in the quarter, compared with $37.77 in the earlier period, acknowledging the role that the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies have played in lifting prices in recent months. BP said that the producers' decision-making on production levels continues to be a key factor in oil prices. OPEC and its allies, including Russia, are expected to meet on Thursday to discuss production levels. On a call with analysts, Mr. Looney shrugged off what may be the growing pressure to break up big oil companies. Recently, Third Point, a New York-based fund management firm, suggested that Royal Dutch Shell, BP's rival, could be substantially more valuable if broken up into an oil business and a lower carbon energy business. Sorry. We're going to take a break real quick. We're going to look up something. BP. Real quick, let me show you what's on my phone. I thought that was a text message. That was Samsung's legal terms. You don't need to be knowing too much of Shaz's personal life yet. I see it's Mike. I feel like more recently, as I've gone on this journey, especially for the last 6 months, as I started a documentary in New York City, which is on my Instagram, Shaz Saves the World. My job is to give people a voice. That's what we're trying to do. Get everyone included in the story. And I trust that the story then will collect all of our wisdom. But something funny about BTP, well, not so funny. BP Iraq. Iraq approves BP plan to spin off giant Rumaila oil field. BP considers spinning off Iraq operations. BP looks dirtier than Exxon in new data from giant U.S. oil field. BP PetroChina formed JV to manage Iraq's Rumaila oil field. Okay, so Iraqi minister says BP moles quitting Iraq. Let's do BP Iraq operations. As Western oil giant cuts production, state-owned companies step up. BP to spin off Iraq operations. So BP is making record money, right? And they're in Iraq. So when we say we invaded Iraq for the for private corporations in order to profit, literally private, and this isn't even an American private corporation, this is British Petroleum, is now operating in Iraq, managing what used to be Iraq's state-owned sector. And if you so all of this we can research into, but I can do this off of memory, and this isn't even controversial. We went into Iraq under George Bush's doctrine of privatizing all of the state-owned companies, and then who reaped the rewards? They just handed them out to the corporations that crony capitalism that have the most connections. BP is one of those apparently. And also when you see America versus China, America versus Russia, what's actually happening on the ground? Chinese companies are profiting from our Iraq war, as well as British companies. So you wanted me at 18 to learn Arabic, go fight a war that you had planned out a decade before. They say, oh, because remember, there's no connection between 9/11 and Iraq. There never has been. There never has been any WMD, nothing. And also, after we went into Iraq, we introduced ISIS. All of that came after we invaded. It's very obvious cause and effect. So if we didn't go in there for WMD, and we didn't go in there to make us safer, why did we go in there? Well, who benefited from it? I luckily didn't go. My friends did. My family members did. My family member, one of them, he's 100% disabled. Where's the justice for him? He didn't get money. He got trauma. Trauma that's affected him, our family. It will affect him the rest of his life. And then who profited? This is literally, this company, which wasn't operating in Iraq before, is operating now. It could only do that because of the blood, sweat, and tears of people like us, of the military members, who are asked to do this for what, $14,000, $16,000. And then in the meantime, the private sector gets to go over there, She Industries, Blackwater, whatever you call them now, and they get to make $150,000, $200,000 and fuck everything up for the rest of us because they don't have to abide by international norms. Where's the justice for this type of, this literally, and then also in this article right here, this is why we're tracking the narratives. BP said on Tuesday, the higher oil and natural gas prices led to its sharp earnings increase. No mention that they're operating in Iraq. What are the articles that are mentioning that they're operating in Iraq? It's not the New York Times, which is the paper of record. What are these articles? Israeli Defense, S&P Global, the Bristol Press, Energy World, Financial Times, Oil Price, the Wall Street Journal, Argus, Yahoo Finance. So it has to be a smaller media source, or it has to be a very specific industry media source. But meanwhile, every single day, the New York Times has published an article about Kenosha and the Kyle Rittenhouse. Why do I know those names? Because every single day, the New York Times mentions a race debate while we ignore the war, which took all of our money, which is taking our life. Who are the most noble among us as a society? Not to be in a competition, but nobility, character. Who are the bravest? Who are the people who step up to defend the rest of us? I'm not being cynical. I'm not making fun of people. Literally, the military. The point of the military is to defend the country. I joined 2000 before 9/11 because my grandpa was in. I always knew I wanted to serve in the military a little bit because I think it's a noble thing. I have family members who are police officers. Some of us, when I was in Occupy Wall Street, one of the jobs I volunteered to do is to walk around at night and de-escalate, break up fights. Because if we're going to have any sort of community, we need peace. And those of us, I was the captain of my wrestling team, those of us who don't mind being physical, but also are relatively calm, we're the bouncers, we're the peacemakers, we're the soldiers. There are crazy people who are looking for war and looking for fights, but the ones who keep peace are just the ones who are physically confident, but they also have peace. And they have a lot of love and compassion too. And that's, when I was in the military, you recognize the ones who need money, who want adventure, this and that, but then you recognize these military family members who are like you find out, oh, their dad served, their grandpa served. There's family, military families. What is that? It's people who have an inborn desire to protect. My grandfather, before he was in the military, kicked a mugger off a bus on his first date with my grandma. One of the reasons she fell in love with him. Someone tried to rob a bus and he de-armed him and threw him off the bus. The guy had a knife and he got the knife away from him and literally threw him off the bus. My other grandfather shot someone who tried to rob him. My dad chased down a mugger in LA. This is just some of us when you see injustice, and my dad was shot for that and he survived. But he saw someone being robbed and he ran towards danger. Some people instinctually run towards danger. That's something noble to be commended, and for the government of the United States to take advantage of that natural impulse, to take advantage of those families, those people among us who have a desire. When we were in basic training, there was a time when they told us a war just broke out. They were tricking us. And I've said the story plenty of times before. This will be the time I say it now. But we were in basic training, and the whole point of basic training is to fuck with you. And so at one point, we're getting a briefing on some sort of values, and they say, oh my gosh, like the commander comes out. We never hear from her. She's a black captain. And we just like the highest command. Every now and then they come and they talk with us, and then they disappear to do paperwork or whatever it is they do. But so she comes out and she says, something happened in the Middle East. There's been a convoy of, I think they said, military supplies and uniforms, but something, and we're 18-year-olds. We don't know what the heck geopolitics is all about. But they're like, and this is 2000, remember. So we know that Desert Storm happened. We didn't know that the government had been preparing for decades, or for a decade, with the project of a new American century to get us into Iraq. So we're ignorant. But she says, something happened in the Middle East. They took our supplies. They took our uniforms. There's people around there who there's something going on. And she says, we're going to fast track you guys. You're all military intelligence, which means we're not infantry. We sign up for 5-6 years because they spend a year and a half training us. They spend $150,000 to give us a top secret security clearance, which I got. I got my top secret clearance. They talked to my friends from high school. They talked to my teachers. It takes about a year and a half to get that. And then also the training to learn the language. They teach you Korean, Japanese, Russian, Arabic. Mine was Arabic. And then I switched to Korean because I had a buddy in Korean. All these little things I did, which I didn't know were taking me out of the line of fire. But while we're in basic training, we're in this values training. Me and my buddies, we make friends while we're going through all of this emotional torture. Everyone I know cried. At one point, you're just sitting on the toilet, or you're in the shower, or you're in your bed, and you're just like, you're exhausted because they're putting you through simulated mental breakdown in case you're in, I guess, combat. So you're physically tired, you're emotionally drained, you're away from your family and friends, and at one point you just break down, and then you know your limit, you know your wall, and you still keep going. You still have to wake up the next morning at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. You still have to, because if you can't, then you're filtered out of that process. So we're in this room, and the captain comes out and she says, something just happened in the Middle East, and we've never seen this authority figure. We've seen her once or twice. So we're like, oh my gosh, the captain. And she's like, we're going to fast track you guys to go there. But since this isn't your MOS, your job, you're technically military intelligence, linguists, like we're the smart guys. We're supposed to be in an office somewhere. My buddies who went through the program and actually did their job, I got chaptered out, but the ones who did the job, like some of them had like soup budgets, drinking budgets, liaison. They got to hang out with people, talk with them at night, and write reports in the morning. Like if you look at NCIS, like it's cool stuff. But there were interrogators in there, which are funny breed of people. But yeah, so she's like, I know this isn't your job, but this just happened in the Middle East. And since you guys are in basic and you're a couple weeks from graduation, we're going to fast track you to go over there and actually deal with this. But it has to be your choice because it's technically not your job. So if you want to deal with this conflict and you want to help us out, stay in the room. And if you don't, and you want to continue on your path to military intelligence training, which is after the basic training, you go to your AIT, your training for your actual job. And that's where I went to Monterey to learn the language. And they're like, just step outside, go outside the room. But those of you who want to go deal with this conflict, we need people immediately. And since you guys are about to graduate basic training, we'll send you over there right away to deal with this. But you're going to be basically infantry. So I stayed, right? And you look around and you see your buddies and you're like, and people are crying. Like I saw specifically an image of one guy with tears coming down his eyes. And we're like, and we're looking around, we're just like, fuck yeah, let's go. Like that, I just got shivers. Like, that's why you join at heart. Some of us, those military families, other people who are really idealistic, the people who like your buddy's getting in a fight. And you don't know if he's right, you know if he's wrong. You run towards. Like I was in a park in New York recently, and a fight was breaking out, and I waited, but it got kind of ugly, and I got up and I was going to go over there. And then there's like 3 or 4 other dudes, grown men, walking towards the area too, and then the guys ran off. But like at some point, someone has to do something. You, especially even New York City, you ignore most stuff. You walk over bodies in New York City. Literally, I've walked over homeless people who could be dead because you just, it's a city. There's so much, you only have so much heart. And that's why the city makes you cold. Like literally, if you stop and talk to everyone and try to help everyone, it's millions of people. But at one point, you're going to lose your humanity if you don't do something. Like I'm in a park with my friend and she's just sitting here and her view of me, it's like I'm just going to watch some guy. Like he was going around the park slapping people, just being, you could tell he was belligerent and he was mentally unstable. I was like, I ran over there like, all right, at least I could restrain him for the police. And then probably 4 or 5 other guys, when they're walking over there too, we're like, okay, yeah, now all of us definitely can restrain him for the police. But like even me myself. So it's like we're in that room and we're like, we're looking around like shit. We thought we signed up for military intelligence, but I guess we're going to war. And I have a buddy actually, hopefully my chief of staff in Santa Cruz. If I get money, I'll hire him out for this congressional run. He was in that room. One of the reasons I trust him, because like, are you going to be there when the chips are down, right? And so we're like, "Ah, fuck, I guess I thought I was going to be a military intelligence dude, but I guess I'm going to fight a war." And and then once everyone, like, I think a third of us stayed, 2/3 of us left because they didn't sign up for that. They signed up. We get a $50,000 bonus. Like military intelligence, you'll get the most out of the military because you tested the most. You tested the most, so you're going to get probably a cushy job. You're going to get a nice sign-on bonus. Like $50,000 isn't a little bit of money. Um, I didn't get it because I didn't stay in. And then once they got the people out, the people who stayed, then the officer, she gave us a really nice speech. And this is why there's parts of the military that are bad that could be reformed, but the nice things are the character, the people who are in, and the values. Because otherwise, like that's the idea about defending your nation, defending your home, defending your family, defense. There's at one point the language has to be violent. If you're going to be confronted with violence, you got there's only so much talking that can be involved. And she said, no, that was all bullshit. I just made that up. Yeah, I mean, not those words, but she was like, this was a test. You, first and foremost, the point of the army is to fight and win land wars. All of our branches have their different mission, but the army, I wasn't in the Marines, wasn't in the Air Force, whatever their missions are. But the army is well, the Marines, I think, is first ones in. They're like the army, but a little bit more aggressive. But the army, the point of the army repeatedly told to us was to fight and win land wars. So everything else we do is additional to that, but we're army soldiers and then we're military intelligence. At one point there might be a rifle in your hand and you have to defend your base, you have to do something. You're not just that office guy and that's it. You're a soldier who works in an office. So she said we made the right decision, and because first and foremost we're soldiers. And the people outside were chewed out and they were made to sit on the curb and they were just yelled at. Well, that's most of basic training, but they really tore into those people and they humiliated them. And the people outside told me that they had they felt really bad. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. Maybe it's a little harsh. A lot of stuff that they do in basic training isn't really like PC, but it got the point across to me. And it made me proud of my decision because it was an instinctual one. We were just like, literally, you're sitting there and you're like, this is what I signed up for. Because like I felt that. It was like, yeah, we signed up for, I'm like, I didn't get the money. I didn't care about the money. I signed up to serve and then just got a bad mojo about it and decided when I got my chance to get out to get out. Also, I wasn't really responsible at the time. I had a lot more growing to do. So my military jacket's online for anyone to read, all of my shenanigans and all the trouble I got into. But the point of my service, the reason why I signed up was I know it was from that point, and it was proven when I stayed in that room that if the shit's going down, I'm going to be there. And I'm proud that our military still has that, still has people who I feel run towards danger, not away from it. It's proven time and time again. That's why I'm spending so much time talking about this, because I'm talking about something that pisses me off, pisses a lot of people off. There's a lot of emotions here. And the talking is getting out the logic. Because if you don't talk and you don't explain, all you have is that emotion. And it's very dangerous. Well, no. Why do you think so many soldiers are killing themselves? A lot of these shooters are soldiers because you have this emotion that's not contextualized. There's not a way to get out the injustice that you feel, but you can't explain. Like we've been fucked. There's a crime against humanity, a crime against people, a crime. Trust has been broken between our chain of command, between those who make the mission and those who execute the mission. They call it mission creep, but it's way more serious than mission creep. Sending someone for a job you didn't fully explain to them. You lied to them. You started a war of aggression, and then you made noble people from noble families who have probably some of the best character, whatever is genetic in our moral makeup. These are some of the best among us who are willing to sacrifice themselves for a noble cause. And instead, you ask them to sacrifice themselves for BP's profit. That's a story we have to have. The anger is still there. There's veterans who confronted Biden saying, "I'll never vote for you because you pushed this war." There's the trust has been broken, and it's a very dangerous thing. It needs to be rebuilt, but first it needs to be acknowledged, and it's not being acknowledged. That's a lot of emotions. I could keep talking. I could talk for hours about this. One of the main reasons I'm running was to get the veterans into the discussion, and I mean that's the whole idea about this: to ground our politics in objective reality, to get these emotions into a context in which we can start healing. Because if not, we're it's going to be discharged in very bad ways. But yeah, it is. That is well. That's why I talk about war. It's the greatest injustice, and war abroad is at first and foremost war at home, and crimes of humanity have been committed against crimes against humanity have been. I don't know how to phrase it. I'm still figuring out how to phrase it, but it needs to be spoken on. Yeah. All right. Meta makes changes to marketing strategy amid scandal. The so-called media review, the first for Meta, a new parent company named for Facebook and its sister apps, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger, concluded on Tuesday when it chose the Spark Foundry agency as its new global planning and buying partner. Winning the Meta account offered agencies access to the social media behemoth's deep pockets and sizable influence. Advertising Week, a recent industry conference, featured panels presented by Meta, which has also sponsored events for the Association of National Advertisers and the American Association of Advertising Agencies. Meta, like many other companies, works with both creative agencies, which help design and produce marketing campaigns, and with media agencies, which help determine where the ads go. During a large-scale boycott of the social network last year by advertisers upset with the platform's policy around hate speech, Colleen DeCourcy, Wyden Kennedy's chief creative officer, said the situation created a lot of hard conversations inside the agency. Asked in Time magazine whether she expected Facebook to be a client in 2021, she said, "If I was a betting person, I wouldn't put too much of my dollars on that space." A Wyden Kennedy spokeswoman said the agency was no longer working with Meta and that they parted ways in the first half of the year. As Meta's troubles mounted, employees at some of the agencies protested the idea having the company as a client. The people said, I get so confused. Like one article in the New York Times says, let's take away gender from language. And then meanwhile, they use spokeswoman, congresswoman. It's like, make up your mind on wokeness. Opioid makers win major victory in California trial. 4 manufacturers of prescription opioids won the pharmaceutical industry's first major legal victory in the opioid crisis, turning aside claims by local California governments that they contributed substantially to the epidemic. The manufacturers include Johnson & Johnson, which has a nationwide opioid settlement offer pending, Teva, a maker of generic opioids based in Israel, Allergan, a subsidiary of AbbVie, and Endo Pharmaceuticals. Even if the judge could infer that the rise in opioid prescriptions must have logically included the medically inappropriate ones, he wrote, the plaintiffs did not offer evidence to show that, without rank speculation, the volume of those prescriptions helped create the public nuisance, and, if so, to what extent. The ruling underscored what legal experts have asserted from the outset about the opioid litigation, that apportioning responsibility will be very difficult because opioids pass through so many entities, including manufacturers, medical supply distributors, doctors, and pharmacies, including big box retailers, before reaching a patient. Endo did not make false or misleading statements, and Endo's lawful conduct did not cause the widespread public nuisance at issue in plaintiff's complaint. Teva said in a statement that a clear win for many patients in the U.S. who suffer from opioid addiction will only come when comprehensive settlements are finalized and resources are made available to all who need them. Teva and Allergen are currently on trial in New York, their first jury trial in an opioid case. Both Endo and Johnson have already settled the case. Johnson & Johnson, referring to its pharmaceutical division, Janssen, which made its opioids, said the well-reasoned tentative decision reflects the facts of the case. Janssen's actions relating to the marketing and promotion of its important prescription pain medications were appropriate and responsible and did not cause any public nuisance. More same-sex couples may be eligible for Social Security survivor benefits. Surviving members of same-sex couples who were unable to marry because it wasn't yet legal may now be eligible for survivor benefits from Social Security. Even after winning the right to marry across the United States more than 6 years ago, some same-sex couples have faced challenges obtaining certain benefits. To qualify for survivor benefits, for example, couples need to have been married for at least 9 months. Recent developments ensure that both groups of survivors, those who are able to marry and those who are not, will have access to benefits. On Monday, the Justice Department and the Social Security Administration dropped Trump-era appeals of 2 class action suits in the Ninth Circuit. Survivor benefits are now equally available to everyone, including potentially thousands of same-sex partners who cannot marry their loved ones and may have thought it was futile to apply. The group filed the 2 suits in 2018. Survivors can collect on their partner's earnings record if it is higher than their own retirement or disability benefit, or they can collect the benefits as a way to delay their own benefits, which they can collect later when they are worth more. Another Apple worker says the company retaliated against her. Jeanette Parrish, a former Apple Maps program manager, accused Apple and Tim Cook, Apple's chief executive, of violating federal labor law by firing her in retaliation for forming the employee group known as #Apple2. Deirdre O'Brien, Apple's human resource chief, told employees in a September meeting viewed by the New York Times that the company tracks pay and closes wage disparities whenever they are found. Barbara Dawn Underwood, an Apple retail store employee in Georgia, sued Apple for $1.7 million, accusing the company of failing to stop a coworker from sexually harassing and assaulting her, and then retaliating by firing her while she was trying to return to work after taking leave. Ms. Parrish, before she was fired in October, collected more than 500 stories from people who said they were current or former Apple employees describing verbal abuse, sexual harassment, retaliation, and discrimination at work. Ms. Parrish said Apple told her she had been fired for deleting files from her company computer and phone before handing them over to be examined, while the company investigated whether she leaked the recording of an Apple meeting to media outlets. People don't want to be targeted by executives for retaliatory investigations when they've done nothing wrong. For some Apple workers, Ms. Jovic, an outspoken former employee, has been a rallying point. As demand for green energy grows, solar farms face local resistance. Until recently, most farms were built in the West, where abundant sunshine powers industrial-scale solar arrays, and installations were farther away from sightlines. In the first half of this year alone, developers installed 5.7 gigawatts of solar capacity for a total of 108.7 gigawatts of capacity, sufficient to reach 18.9 million U.S. homes, according to the Solar Energy Industries Association. Typically, 5 to 7 acres are needed to create 1 megawatt of power, said Matt Birchby, co-founder and president of Swift Current Energy, a solar developer that is working on a proposal for Clark County, Kentucky. Improvements in the capabilities of the panels, including the development of so-called bifacial panels that capture the sun on both sides of the panel, allow for greater electricity generation in fewer panels, meaning a smaller footprint. Some residents created a group called Friends of Columbia Solar to promote their view that more solar power is necessary to combat climate change. Another solution for developers is agrivoltaics, a technology that allows land to be used for both farming and solar power. We have been trying to tell local officials that there is support for solar and that it's not a simple story, said Juan Pablo Velez, a co founder of Friends of Columbia Solar. CDC recommends COVID vaccine for younger children. Every million doses given to children aged 5 to 7 would prevent about 58,000 cases and 226 hospitalizations in that group, according to the CDC. Immunizing these children is expected to prevent about 600,000 new cases from November 2021 to March 2022. Vaccination of children aged 5 to 11 years will not only help prevent COVID-19 infection and serious consequences of infection in this age group, but will also help children emotionally and socially, said Dr. Pamela Rockwell, who represents the American Academy of Family Physicians on the CDC panel. Children aged 5 to 11 will receive one-third of the dose authorized for those 12 and older, and the vaccine will be delivered with smaller needles and packaged in smaller vials to avoid a mix-up with adult doses. Schools in all 50 states already require certain vaccines, but those have full approvals from the FDA. COVID vaccine for children have only been given emergency authorizations thus far. The risk appears to decline in children 12 to 15 and is expected to be even lower in younger children. Experts say that at the meeting. Last week, Moderna said its vaccine produced a potent immune response in children's ages 6 through 11 who received the adult dose. Military grants few vaccine exemptions as deadline looms. 2 months after the Pentagon began requiring all troops to get the coronavirus vaccine or face dismissal, the vast majority have now had shots, in part because none received a religious exemption, military officials said. While vaccine exemptions are broadly worded, requests based on religious beliefs are coming under close scrutiny. In the military and the Department of Veteran Affairs, the first federal agency to impose a mandate. Across the country, there are at least 40 legal challenges to vaccine and testing mandates issued by cities, hospitals, universities, and other employers that have yet to move forward, while others have been knocked back. Anyone seeking one from the Pentagon or Department of Veteran Affairs would be required to have established history of adherence to religion that prohibits vaccines, among other things. The U.S. Air Force hits its vaccine deadline with nearly all troop with the U.S. Air Force hits its vaccine deadline with nearly all troops vaccinated. Some people have embraced vaccine conspiracy theories or have been fearful of possible side effects or do not see themselves at risk for the virus. It's a lawful order, Mr. Kirby said of the vaccine mandate, and commanders have the right to ultimately do what they need to do for the readiness of the unit, and if that comes to doing something of a punitive nature, they will certainly have the right and that authority. On a military subgroup on the social news and message board site Reddit, people swapped advice on how to talk to those who were resisting a vaccine, from offering scientific evidence to refuting claims that the vaccine stem from aborted fetal cells, to noting that troops take far more dangerous risks in combat. Not everyone in New York wants the coronavirus to lose. For nearly a year now, a small team of officials from City Hall and the Public Health Department have pored over detailed reports about how vaccine misinformation has spread through New York City. In March, the city's Polish community was treated to false claims that the mRNA vaccines were designed to annihilate Christianity and the Polish nation. A city report in March described a rumor prevalent in New York's Haitian neighborhoods. The vaccine was created to reduce the Black population. Each of these bits of misinformation was reported to the city's Vaccine Command Center, a high-level group in City Hall created to help oversee New York's vaccination drive. The intelligence in the report is compiled by a team of about 15 people inside the city health department, a handful of other city officials, and the research firm GroupSense. City officials monitoring of citizens engaged in legally protected gatherings is a tricky matter, particularly in a city that for years allowed its police department to spy on Muslim communities and keep a rolling database of almost entirely innocent citizens, overwhelmingly Black men. In January, the analysts of the Vaccine Command Center alerted the city officials when a widely circulated WhatsApp message wrongly led thousands of New Yorkers to believe that the Brooklyn Army Terminal vaccination site had a large number of extra doses, sparking a rush to the facility. Last article, how blue and red states deal with COVID. Deep blue states will need to put their egos and blinders aside to adapt to an endemic COVID world, lest they become as deluded as the deep red states. Do the deep blue states really want to live in a state of emergency for years to come to maintain a perceived moral and intellectual high ground? Comparing different areas of the US suggests that there have been many preventable deaths. I live in a red state, in a county with slightly over half the people vaccinated. Rather than berating the caution of the deep blue states, perhaps an article for deep red states encouraging more precautions could actually serve to help us get to that post-COVID normalcy that we all crave. As prison populations have slowly declined, older people serving long sentences have largely been left behind. So there is a worsening crisis of aging, sickness, and lonely deaths in New York, as other states. To protect our elders from the horrors of growing old behind bars, policymakers must act to provide meaningful release opportunities, including by passing the Elder Parole Bill here in New York City. That article's all over the place because that is probably an article for letters to the editor. So what you have random sentences from different letters to the editor all put together. That's why I always link the Google Doc that has all of these summaries, and then those link to the actual New York Times article. So this one, letters to the editor opinion. So you should always, if you're following Shaz, be able to follow his work, form your own opinion. Together we're going to find the truth. And then we're going to save the world. But we are done for today. 2 hours, that's a long one. Thank you, King Solowing, for always checking in. My name is Shaz. Years for the Revolution. Signing off.